In the last video, I talked about how Lin-Manuel Miranda uses repeated musical themes called leitmotifs, and how he specifically uses them not in the way they were used in operas and traditional musicals, but instead models them after the way a DJ would curate songs on the radio. And I also talked about how he got this idea from Les Mis. But what began for me as this relatively benign discussion of radio-style leitmotifs unexpectedly turned into the musical theater matrix, where I fell way down the rabbit hole into another universe where the rules are different. This is how I got there and what mind-bending things it might mean for musical theater as a whole. My friends, welcome to the musical theater matrix. And it all began with the film In the Heights. Now you might be wondering how I got from In the Heights to a crazy musical theater theory. Well, you know that scene where Kevin calls Stanford and the wait music is a Muzak version of You'll Be Back from Hamilton? Well, see, that got me thinking, does Hamilton the musical exist in this reality? Or is You'll Be Back somehow not a song from Hamilton, but just a song that exists in the world, sort of like how the song Siempre from In the Heights sounds like an old bolero song that already existed, except it was written by Lin to sound like an old song. But of course, to these characters in the Heights, it is an old song, just like how You'll Be Back gets the Muzak easy listening treatment because it too is an old song in the world of In the Heights. In another video, I explained how You'll Be Back was a pastiche of the Beatles. It's getting better all the time. Da, 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 da. So what if in the Heights there's an alternate history where the Beatles wrote You'll Be Back and it didn't come from a show called Hamilton? Because alternatively, if Hamilton the musical exists in the Heights, then Lin exists in the Heights, which means they'd know that Siempre isn't an old song, which means it's not a tradition holding this community together, and basically the whole world would fall apart. That is, unless... What if the songs worked in a different way? What if the singing in the Heights wasn't a performance for an audience, but was just the way that these people actually express themselves normally? Like, these people just sing when they want to communicate in daily life. And in that scenario, the hold music wouldn't be a song from Hamilton or the Beatles, but it would literally just be a recording of someone saying that soon you'll be back on the line with someone from Stanford. It's just your run-of-the-mill message, only in this universe, things like that are sung. And if this is how the singing works, then all the songs in the Heights are actual things that are really happening. Or in fancy film speak, the songs are diegetic. For example, I think we can all agree that Darth Vader can't hear the bombastic minor key Imperial March theme by John Williams. It's part of the music that underscores and represents him. In other words, it's non-diegetic, but it doesn't actually exist as music that Darth Vader himself can hear or even be aware of. Or does it? In the film Solo, Han Solo sees an ad to join the Imperial Army with the Imperial March playing in the background in a major key. And I'm guessing the Imperial March is in the ad because it's an important melody. Hell, for all we know, it's the official Imperial anthem. So it's probable that Darth Vader does know the major key version of the Imperial March, and while everyone in the Star Wars universe hears it in major, we, the audience, are hearing it in minor as a kind of commentary. So just as with Vader and the Imperial March, are the characters in the Heights aware even slightly of the songs that they're singing? Conventional wisdom says no, because we're often invited to believe that the songs in musicals are really just metaphors. It Won't Be Long Now is a metaphor for Vanessa's desire to make it as an independent fashion designer, and that's why we see the world through her eyes and we pull out of her eye, showing that we were seeing a metaphorical depiction of how she feels, when in fact the reality of her life is that she's stuck in the salon. It's kind of like how Chicago shows the reality of what's going on and then goes into Roxy's eye to take us into her perspective through the metaphor of a jazz cabaret show. In other words, the songs are all in the characters' minds. Unless they're performing a song within the reality of the characters, which does happen, but most of the time, it's as if there's a parallel cabaret cabaret universe where most of the songs exist, separate from the real reality.
By metaphor!
However, this interpretation is contradicted in When the Sun Goes Down, as Benny and Nina are dancing on the side of an apartment building, and this kid seems to see their gravity-defying dance number. Then doesn't that mean that Nina and Benny are actually singing and dancing? Not in some metaphorical way, but in a real way where other people can see it. Doesn't that mean Nina and Benny, in some sense, have to be aware that they are indeed dancing and singing? The film even suggests this when Nina repeatedly says,
"Shh, let me just listen to my block. Let me just listen to my block."
And Usnavi claims,
"The streets were made of music."
And it's fitting that the director of In the Heights, John M. Chu, began his career at USC Film School, where his thesis film was When the Kids Are Away, all about a neighborhood where all the stay-at-home parents dance as if in a musical when the kids are away. And ever since then, Chu has been a director who specializes in making films with people dancing in the streets, including Step Up 2, The Streets, as well as Step Up 3D, not to mention the upcoming big screen adaptation of Wicked. But yes, Chu's films have a strong tendency to include characters who hear music in their regular daily lives. Now understand that Lin is not just representing Washington Heights in some fantastical magical realism sort of way. In fact, the real life streets of Washington Heights are indeed filled with music.
This is actually a neighborhood that sings, that makes music, that dances on the street.
I mean, even just filming this, it's hard for us to get people to turn down their radios. That's what it's like in Washington Heights. There's salsa blasting out of stereos, there's hip-hop and reggaeton coming out of people's cars.
So this is just how Lin grew up, hearing all this music around him, and here's where things get a little trippy, because Hamilton in and of itself also exists in this same musical theater reality. The whole idea of being alive is defined as hearing music. When Hamilton is imagining what death is like, he says,
"Is it like a beat without a melody?"
And when Hamilton actually meets the bullet that will bring his death, he recognizes this as death because
there is no beat, no melody.
Life is music and music is life, not just metaphorically, but in a real way. There is literally no beat and no melody in this section of the show. Underneath Hamilton's spoken word poem of his final words, there is simply a desolate, windy noise soundscape of non-musical sound design. And this isn't even the only time in Hamilton where Hamilton is aware of the music. In Farmer Refuted, Hamilton says,
"Don't modulate the key, then not debate with me."
He's referring to a key change or modulation that happens when Samuel Seabury's melody goes up from C major to D flat major. But Hamilton's musical commentary only makes sense if everyone else can hear the same music. Can you imagine if he's saying, "Don't modulate the key," and everyone's around there going like, what is this guy talking about? No, they have to know what he's talking about. And so if they can all hear the music, then they're all living in a musical theater universe where everyone literally sings their thoughts and feelings. And if that's true, then the actors in this theater scene in Hamilton are also singing, and all of Hamilton's Shakespeare quotations are also song lyrics, meaning that in the world of Hamilton, perhaps even Shakespeare's contemporaries wrote musicals, which is the premise of Something Rotten.
Whoa. So an actor is saying his lines, and then out of nowhere, he just starts singing?
Yes!
Well, that is the stupidest thing that I have ever heard.
Which brings me to, no, not Schmigadoon yet, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, specifically the idea of the multiverse. In Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse, a portal opens allowing the Spider People from parallel universes to enter into our universe. We're introduced to multiple Spider People from multiple universes, one of whom is Spider-Man Noir. Now, Spider-Man Noir doesn't sing or dance, but he is based on a film genre known as film noir, and another Spider person, Penny, appears to be based on the genre of anime. Now, if an entire version of the world can be based on a film genre like film noir or anime, then there's no reason an entire world couldn't be based on another film genre like a movie musical. And if you're thinking, yes, we did see a Spider-Man come from a world where people sing and dance already in the Spider-Man musical on Broadway, Turn Off the Dark. Yes, that did happen. But that Spider-Man musical existed in our world, where people don't sing and dance unless they're on stage. No, I'm talking about a world where people, spider people even, sing and dance without being on a stage. They do it because that's just how they live their lives and communicate with other people. And this isn't even to bring up the fact that spider people don't even need to be people apparently. They can be pigs, like Peter Porker, aka Spider Ham, just like how Loki can somehow be an alligator.
Why the hell is there an alligator in here?
He's a Loki.
I mean, I'm not making this up. This is now canon in the MCU, which means somewhere out there in the infinite multiverses that exist, there is an MTU, a musical theater universe, a place where people live in musicals, and this MTU is where we get Schmigadoon. The main characters of our non-musical theater universe somehow enter into Schmigadoon, a play on the fantastical musical theater place Brigadoon. In Brigadoon, everyone basically just wakes up for one day every 100 years.
You mean that you go to bed at night and when you wake up the next day, it's 100 years later?
Aye.
So the way life operates there is really different. In Schmigadoon, the entire town is living in a musical and doesn't really even know it.
That was a very handsome song.
What song?
The one you were just singing to me.
Singing?
The music that the town sings and hears all comes from some undisclosed place that seemingly controls their entire reality.
Now, why is music coming from everywhere?
For example, Melissa, played by Cecily Strong, is from our world and yet can suddenly sing a fully realized musical number in Schmigadoon.
Could be fun.
No. Do not.
Never had corn pudding.
Without skipping a beat. It all comes out of the fact that musical theater is simply the way life works in Schmigadoon. It's not a special skill or something that needs to be produced to be put on. It's just the way things happen.
Where life's a musical every day.
It's like the Truman Show, where watching Truman live his life is the show. On Schmigadoon, the citizens of Schmigadoon are just living their mundane lives, and it's just a coincidence that in our world, their mundane lives are what we'd consider Broadway quality. Now, the MTU existed long before Schmigadoon, but never quite in such a well-realized way. Now, I know what you're saying. Schmigadoon is not necessarily unique. There have been musical theater TV shows before. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Smash, Glee, High School Musical, The Series, Girls Five Ever, Gallivant, Flight of the Conchords, The Get Down, Empire, Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, Nashville, and even the police drama Cop Rock. Seriously, you have to see this show to believe it.
Think of it like if Pitch Perfect crashed into the wire and there were absolutely no survivors.
Hell, with the upcoming series Hawkeye, even the MCU is getting in on the musical action. And on top of that, there are also the occasional musical episodes of non-musical shows. These are shows that decided to do a one-off episode in the style of a musical, and there are many great examples of this throughout TV history as well. Generally speaking, these shows tend to use the musical numbers either as metaphors, the Chicago model, or as actual musical performances, where not just the actors but the characters themselves are on stage rehearsing or performing a song to an audience. Either that, or the musical performances solely exist in someone's head. For example, in the Scrubs musical episode,
Why are you singing?
Everyone singing is explained by an aneurysm in a patient's brain.
Look at the temporal lobe. That could be why she's hearing music.
Biggest aneurysm I've ever seen.
Which means that everyone isn't actually singing, they're just being filtered through this woman's neurological disorder. But see, that's not the MTU, that's just people in our world who are engaged in some way with music, either as part of a real performance or an imagined one. For example, in Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, we see musical numbers all the time, but in the finale, we learn that Rebecca Bunch actually has a liminal space in her head that actively converts her daily life into musical numbers.
Oh, good, an abstract theatrical space.
To everyone else, though, those musical numbers are not actually happening.
Hey!
Okay, yes, a little later, Paula does enter the musical theater space, but it's still a space in Rebecca's imagination, not in the real world. In other words, these musical numbers are almost like a filter that give the story a heightened perspective as we connect to the characters through song. And to be clear, there's nothing wrong with using this type of filter to justify why people are singing. In fact, there are a lot of musicals about musicians because it's easier to justify the music, where the people on stage are singing and dancing, but it's under the context of being performers in a band, such as in Jersey Boys, Once, Memphis, Dreamgirls, Beautiful, etc. However, this also applies to shows that are self-referential about writing musicals, such as Title of Show.
What if this dialogue were set to music? What if what we're saying could be said in a song?
But as brilliant as it is, it's not part of the MTU. In the MTU, they don't write musicals because in the MTU, musicals aren't written. They just simply happen, as if you were sucked into a movie musical like in Teen Beach Movie.
Why are you singing?
I don't know. I suddenly just
broke into song.
We're part of an involuntary musical number.
The MTU implies that the songs are just the characters expressing their thoughts and emotions like you would in everyday conversation. It's sort of like if you ever talk to yourself, hey, I won't judge, but some could argue that you talking to yourself is a type of monologue. In Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, a postmodern reimagining of Hamlet, we see Hamlet being overheard by two of his friends, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, as he's just sort of talking to himself.
What's he doing? Talking to himself.
Of course, we recognize what Hamlet is saying as being a famous Shakespearean monologue, but to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, they're just watching their friend go crazy.
You keep talking to yourself, people think you're crazy.
Thanks for the tip.
What? I wasn't talking to you.
And just like Hamlet's monologues, you might also talk to yourself in order to just get some stuff off your chest, and you're not performing or saying anything to anyone. You're just in dialogue with yourself and your own thoughts and feelings. Well, now it's like that, except instead of just saying those thoughts and feelings, you're singing them. So instead of a monologue, you'd be doing a songologue. One of the best musical episodes of a TV series comes from season 6 of Buffy. You see, just like in Scrubs, there is a framing device for why all the songs are happening. But unlike Scrubs, that reason is something that exists in the reality of the show. So much so that it applies to everyone, not just the characters in the story, but random people on the street.
They got the mustard. They got the
It isn't right, it isn't fair. There was no parking anywhere.
And why is this happening?
I've got a theory that it's a demon.
A demon named Sweet has the particular superpower of making everyone around him sing their innermost thoughts in song form. That's right, songologues, diegetic songologues that are neither metaphors nor imagined performances nor performances of any kind, but just spontaneous outbursts of unrehearsed songs that everyone can hear and comment on.
She's also really greedy. She never.
His eyes are beating.
This is my verse. Hello.
The Guy Who Didn't Like Musicals has a similar out-of-this-world premise that also makes it part of the MTU. There, the reason everyone is singing and dancing is that an alien invasion has taken over the bodies of the human population and is making them act as if they're in a musical. You'll notice that the MTU in both Buffy and The Guy Who Didn't Like Musicals, not to mention the DC universe with the villainous Music Meister, is viewed as something nefarious, something sinister, and that's probably a strategy to disarm the audience away from musical theater's most reliable criticism.
I'm as corny as Kansas in August.
That it's cheesy, that it's overly sentimental, or hokey, or dated, or just bad. Clearly, these shows are all made with a love of musicals, but they're also made with the knowledge that some audiences don't like musicals.
You know how much I hate musicals. People don't just burst into song in real life.
Hell, it's the very premise of The Guy Who Didn't Like Musicals.
I don't like musicals. Watching people sing and dance makes me very uncomfortable.
And that's what makes The Guy Who Didn't Like Musicals even more amazing, commenting on this phenomenon where shows have to pretend to paint musicals in a negative light just so that they can be free to luxuriate in the musical theater universe. It's sort of like how Rick and Morty invented the voice ovarians to explain why there's voiceover narration in this episode. It's to mock this stylistic device for being cliche.
Voiceovarians.
While at the same time giving license to the writers to write voiceover narration.
Something new was forming, and I was at the bottom of it.
I let Morty have his voiceover. It's really all he had left.
You can imagine the writers of Rick and Morty having a musical episode, for example, that gets explained away by the Songologues, or something like that. I'll let them figure it out. John Mulaney's musical theater sketches, and yes, he does write them, also work in this way. In each of his MTU sketches, the premise is that a mundane locale of New York City life, a bodega bathroom, an airport sushi cellar, a divey diner, a cheap gift shop, are in fact the scenes of vibrant, emotional musical theater numbers performed by the lowliest of the low, a bodega cat, a family of lobsters, roaches. Again, subverting musical theater tropes while at the same time enjoying them. But there is no justification for these musical numbers, they just exist as if they're part of our world.
I mean, you can't eat the lobster now, man. They just sang Les Mis, bro.
Which brings me back to Schmigadoon, starring SNL's Cecily Strong and produced by SNL's Lorne Michaels. The MTU in this model has the entire town of Schmigadoon living inside a musical, and they don't even know it. So what would it be like to live in a world where performing musical numbers is taken for granted? Well, you would probably follow the old musical theater dictum,
when you can no longer speak, you sing, and when you can no longer sing, you dance.
Paraphrased here.
When you're too emotional to talk, you sing. When you're too emotional to sing, you dance.
What happens when you're too emotional to dance? Does it loop back around to talking?
And just as you don't need to proofread sentences that you're speaking for the first time, you would be singing fully formed melodies and lyrics for the first time.
That was so weird. It was like as soon as I started singing, I knew what to say.
And this would also be true for someone who professes to hate musicals.
We're in an actual musical.
Please, God, no.
Such as Keegan-Michael Key's character, who nevertheless sings a full-on musical theater number.
'Cause you make me wanna sing.
Now, what Schmigadoon is doing here is actually kind of special because it's taking the MTU and is making the MTU musical its own genre of musical. And we get a clue as to how in the ending of season 1. Now, in season 1, there's a lot of references to Golden Age musicals that came to prominence roughly starting with Oklahoma and ending sometime in the 70s. Musicals like
Oklahoma and Carousel and South Pacific. Oh, hello, West Side Story.
That sounds like all the musicals.
Jack Viertel says that the Golden Age ended with a chorus line, but I think there is another breaking point that's alluded to in the show. Now, Stephen Sondheim did write Golden Age musicals such as the lyrics for West Side Story and Gypsy, as well as the music and lyrics of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. But he also represented a break with the Golden Age with his musical Company, which was no longer about a single narrative, but a bunch of vignettes of couples.
Probably the major thing that made Company controversial was that there was no plot. The audience kept waiting for a plot.
And it wasn't about a character who wants something, but about a character who's ambivalent and just wants to want something.
Want something. Want something.
In other words, Company didn't try to sugarcoat reality the way that a lot of Golden Age musicals tended to, but instead it threw reality back in our faces.
What they came to a musical to avoid, they suddenly find facing them on the stage.
So while Schmigadoon Season 1 represents the colorful, energetic romp through the Golden Age, the end of Season 1, spoilers, obviously, ends with not a Golden Age parody, but with a Sondheim parody.
That's what's so great about change.
Bring order to the whole.
This is how we change.
How, George? Which then morphs into the style of another post-Golden Age composer, Stephen Schwartz. And at the very end of season 1, Josh and Melissa are about to cross the bridge back to reality. But the season ends before we see if they actually made it back to our universe. Now, a lot of people on Twitter seem to believe that Josh and Melissa instead are headed to a Sondheim musical reality, or at least a reality that has progressed beyond Golden Age aesthetics. In other words, the MTU is not a single musical theater universe based on a single musical theater era, but maybe is a family of universes, with every conceivable configuration of musical theater subgenres reaching all the way into the present day. Which brings us back to In the Heights, because, and hear me out, what if in, let's say, season 12 of Schmigadoon, after Josh and Melissa have experienced Sondheim-Adoon, and Kander and Ebb-Adoon, and Stephen Schwartz-Adoon, and Menken and Ashman-Adoon, and Aarons and Flaherty-Adoon, and Andrew Lloyd Webber-Adoon, and Jukebox-Adoon, and Jonathan Larson-Adoon, and Jason Robert Brown-Adoon, and Janine Tesori-Adoon, they will eventually end up in Lin-Manuel Miranda-Adoon, and basically they will go to the next reality by crossing the bridge, which will become the George Washington Bridge, leading them into Washington Heights and onto the set of a musical.
Let me just listen to my block.
About a group of people who sing their thoughts. In the Heights. Thanks for watching. I'd like to thank my Patreon supporters, including my newest patrons, Paul Anton and Pawn M. This year of musicals isn't over yet, so please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.